Right, well, I'm going to do a little video now which is to complement John's video of Clock Repairs Merseyside, Mainspring Winder Volume 2. And I really do recommend that if you are keen on repairing clocks, subscribe to his channel, because he's a no messing, down to earth clock repairer, and it's been in the family for 2 generations at least, maybe 3 generations. So he knows what he's talking about, but he's not a sort of a conservationist. He's a practical repairer. Now, in his video on Mainspring Winder 2, he illustrates that you use a mainspring winder, which isn't like this one, but it's similar. This one here is a mainspring winder. Now, the problem with that is that when you start doing French clocks, the size of the barrel that you have to wind the spring into is going to be something of this size, 30 millimeters, and you've got to get a sleeve to fit in that. Now, this is a sleeve here. This one I made out of a piece of tubing that I had to buy, and I made it, and it will fit in to the barrel. Yes, but you have to wind the spring so tight that you can actually damage the winding arbor. And I've seen winding arbors where they've been twisted because you're screwing up the spring so tight that there's very little room left. And it looks a bit like this one here, which I did, and I then abandoned it. And unfortunately, I can't read what I wrote on it sufficiently well to be able to decide I'm going to use it on another clock at the moment. So what I do in a French clock, because a French clock has a relatively small spring, I wind it by hand. And I'm going to try and show you now what I do when I wind the spring by hand into the barrel. It is a strenuous job. I have the old spring here, which you can see isn't bad, actually. I think it's had a new tail put on it because the hole, the eye there, isn't the normal eye that you would get. They usually have an elongated, this is just a round hole. So it's probably been repaired. It's a bit tired. Its diameter is not 3 times in that position the diameter of the barrel, which it should be. So I'm going to put in a new one. And here's the new spring. I bought it from Cousins, and I've measured it so it's right. It's 19 millimeters wide. It's 0.28 millimeters thick, and 30 millimeters for the size of the barrel. And that is going to be now squeezed into, the spring's going to be squeezed into this. Before I do that, I'm going to apply some of this super lube. It's what I use, and I've been using for quite some time. It's much lighter than some of the oils that people use, and I just dribble it on and then put a little bit more in afterwards. So I put that on here. Now I will set and see if, I hope you can see what I'm doing, but so this is super stuff, this stuff. Oh God, super lube, yes. Oh. Try again, Simon. So I'm smearing that right through. Just using fingers. These. They're quite useful if you have to remove the spring from the barrel or do anything like that. That helps. So the spring is oiled. Right. Now I've got to get this eye into hook up with the barrel hook in there, and so that I'm wearing strong gloves. They're oily, they're old, but they serve the purpose. Now I've got to try and get that in there, which is not easy. You've got to try it several times to get it. And when you do this, what you've got to make sure is that you don't actually put the spring that you're forcing in behind the spring, which I have done here. So all I'm doing is going to go round and round. I don't know if you can see that. I put it on the wrong side of the spring. So that's going to be, I've got to redo that. Put it in, line it up with the stud. Getting around to come, pulling that right in so that it's going to lie on the inside of the tail. And I'm pretty well getting it now. Now I've got to force this down each time and twist it. Some people, I've seen them do it, they do it with bare hands and holding it up in the air. I can't do that. Right, so we've got to twist it in and force it down, and you're going to get most of the super lube that you've already put on off. That's going to come off, but that doesn't matter, you've got enough on it. Now I am getting this into the barrel. I'll see if I can show you. I don't want to lose it, but maybe you can just see there, the edge, it's going in. Now the hardest bit, you can, once you get this, the swing of it, you can do it, but you've got to really force it in. And the hardest bit is when you get to the end, and you'll find that in a moment. And if you lose it, then the spring takes charge and everything that you've done is lost. Now, right, so now I'm getting quite close to the end now. I hope you can see what I'm doing. And it's really quite hard work because you've got to force it in and you've got to control your handling of the spring, because if it takes charge you will lose it all. Now I'm getting towards the end now. I think you can see there's not much there. I've got to now push that into the heart of the spring, and I've got to pull it out to make sure that it's going to do it. So as I pull it out and twist it in the same motion, and it's getting to the point now where I've got to try and get that into the end of the spring, and now this is where everything can go wrong. Well, you can get it in there. Right, I've been able to do it by twisting it over and squeezing it in. Now that spring is in the coil. Now what I've got to do is to make sure that the eye is caught up on the hook in the barrel, and I can't find the torch now, which would make it quite a bit better, but anyway, you can see that there is a gap here in the spring. The spring is tight against the side going round here, but where the eye is here and the hook, there is a shadow, a gap. If you can see inside of this, you can see that there's a gap between the spring and the barrel opposite the eye. So there's a very good possibility that it's caught up and it's right. So what I've got to do now is put the arbor back in, and engage that under the glove. Okay, so now I've got to put this arbor, get that back into there, and I do it with a bit of gentle persuasion. Preferably not by opening that centre spring. So now that's in there. Now if I twist that, I can make sure it's engaged. Now what I've got to try and do is to put enough tension on this so that I can make sure that that is engaged onto the hook there. Because if I assemble the wretched clock and it's not engaging properly, then you find that the winder just goes round and round and it's not doing it. You've got to take the whole thing to pieces again. So that's the next thing I've got to try and do. And it's not difficult, but you've got to try and hold it as you do it and make sure that that's engaged. You heard it click just now, and I think you can see that the spring is now, I can't get the light right. I wonder if I can. Get to light. I'll do that again. It's quite difficult because you've got to hold the spring and the handle at the same time. Now, I think you can see that there's enough gap on the outside to convince yourself that actually that has engaged in the hook. And I can see that the tail is still where it should be. There's the hook, and I can see that there's a little kink in the spring there, so the tail is caught up. Now I put some more of this in, just to put a drop on each side, so that that is going to be sufficient, and then I can put the barrel cap on and so, and now I'll use some vices, some clamps to clamp that down and get it so that it's really tight. So I have a couple of these and clamp that down. So there we are, and that's one spring done. I've got another one to do, which is in the time train, and so that is here. I've cleaned the barrel out. That's been cleaned out. This is the spring, and it's come, and it's the same size, 19 millimeters, or that's the width of the spring, 0.28, which is the thickness of the spring, and 30, which is the width of the barrel. So I'll just show you what I do on this. So, usually better to undo the damn thing. There we are. Now hold it in one hand, and if you're having a big spring, when you do that and you cut the wire here with a decent pair of wire cutters, that now if it's a big spring, you saw that that part flew out. If it's a big spring, you'll need two hands, but this is a small spring, and that is there. There it is. Now I've got to put that into the next barrel, which I'm not going to do on camera, but I'll first clean it off with white spirit, then I'll put my super lube on. I'll put that on and drop it on and put it in the barrel. And this is the spring. As you can see, that is even worse than the other one, but it's got the eye there on the barrel, but it's already been bastardized. It's been smashed up a bit, and it's wrong. So lastly, do have a look at Clock Repairs Merseyside, John doing his second video on mainspring winders, because that will illustrate what you do for a bigger spring on a German clock or an English clock, which you would find very, very difficult to put it in by hand. But the reason why we do it, I do it on these, is because everything is that much smaller. You've got to wind it up that much more tightly, and there's very little room to play with. And when you put the sleeve into the barrel, there's got to be enough room. That is all right, but by the time you wound the spring, that spring that I've just done, and tightened it up to this point, you may end up by twisting, and I've seen them twisting the arbor. No, because you've had to put so much pressure on it. Well, I hope you get something out of that, and don't be frightened of putting a spring in by hand. Wear strong gloves, perhaps even goggles, and you've jolly well got to try it. And you'll lose it a couple of times, but you'll get it in the end. It's worth it. Right, cheerio.